I've spent the better part of my career trying to think about and be inspired by the questions of the politicality of the theory of translation elaborated by Naoki. So this is a perfect opportunity. At first, I was a little bit concerned because of the way the schedule was reorganized, and Naoki was sort of put onto this panel. And I've always heard and read, for instance, I know Veronica's work pretty well, the written stuff, and had always been excited about meeting her. But I was still worried about putting that together, but it worked out, to my mind, really well, really unexpectedly well, in the sense that it really shows two aspects of what I think are the political implications that we can derive from Naoki's theory, which I'm not going to even try to resume to save time. I think Naoki explained it very, very clearly, and the PowerPoint was very, very helpful. So I won't even go into that. I assume that we all got it, right? So I think there are just basically two things. The first one, the basic idea is that translation is a political, ethical relationship in which power relations and social antagonism are negotiated. And this is what's responsible for the image of translation that we all have today as this incredibly ethical enterprise that contributes to cooperation and understanding in a fractious global world, right? And the problem that I have with this is recently I've been reading Robert Meister's work on transitional justice. And I think this is something that is really important to share, particularly with this group of people, many of whom have a direct experience in their own country or are the inheritors of a process of transitional justice. I've been looking at it specifically in relation to the way it's worked out in Taiwan, but Meister describes this as something that really, well, it has its roots after World War II, the Nuremberg trials, but then really gets solidified after 1989, the fall of communism, and congeals in this human rights discourse, in which we can easily see how, in a certain way, translation is being called upon in this human rights discourse to identify a mode of justice. If I had the time, I would go and look at it in terms of specifically why and how Naoki's analysis of the position of the translator upsets that humanist discourse, the human rights discourse that has become dominant today, and which is what authorizes today, quite paradoxically, military violence against the demons. The people who we've decided today are the demons, and I won't name them. Everybody can think of, there's a whole list of them, and there are two principal ones today, then can become demonized to such an extent that they can be the object of unthinkable violence. I'm afraid this is the direction that we're going. But the Naoki's analysis of the translator as the person who is sociable with foreigners of the foreign, but accompanied by this caveat where he defines the foreign as something that is completely ambivalent, that you just can't, first of all, you can't localize it. You can't say the foreign's over there, right? Or the foreign is that group of people. And he does this specifically through an analysis of the position of the translator. And I think that's really quite brilliant and should be put in the context of a critique of the dominant human rights discourse that is really now today going to lead, I think, unarguably at this point, to the most unthinkable violent defense of global hegemonic whiteness that we have seen, if I could put it in that. The other political moment or moment of politicality in Nauki, I think, is that by seeing translation as an essential quality of linguistic acts in general, which is what he does because he deconstructs the unity of a language and then shows us that, in fact, all language is a form of translation, right? So once we recognize that, then essentially we've accepted the need to then interrogate capitalism and colonialism in terms of why this synergistic relation between capitalism and colonialism finds it so useful to continually produce a sentiment of feeling or a structure of feeling where it's part of our everyday life, where we just feel like the unity of our language is part of common sense. And why it's so necessary for that to be produced and then reproduced. And this is, I think, where tomorrow when we listen, I've read Radha's paper that she'll be giving tomorrow, where she's talking about the absolute necessity of attacking the difference between production and reproduction from a feminist perspective, and then linking those two together. I think this is one of the places where it is most obvious in terms of the theory of translation. Why? Because if the critique of translation that Nauki has elaborated is the most effective critique of the naturalization of that, what Giorgio Agamben calls that romantic ideology that sees language and people as these natural unities and then equates the two of them as though there's a necessary connection between language and people. If Nauki's theory of translation, or Nauki's theory of language, is a critique of this naturalization, then that provides us then with a way and understanding of how the capital relation itself, which is exterior to the social, captures translation and manipulates translation in a way to make it look like the capital relation is internal to the social relation, which is let's put it this, it's the challenge that capital faces in reproduction, is that capital is just not internal to the social relation. This is a work that's been done, I think, most persuasively by a group of Japanologists who are all working in the wake of and the tradition of the Japanese Marxist Uno Kozo. That would be Nagahara Yutaka, Ken Kawashima, and Gavin Walker, principally the three that I know about, who have been doing this kind of work to explain how this exteriority of capital to the social can then be a point at which the capital relation appropriates something like translation, which is really, what is it? It's an apparatus of exteriority, right? Appropriates that to develop capital as something that is just like, it's a natural, relation between consumers and producers and the circulation of commodities, right? Now, as either translators or as researcher scholars, the danger for us, the politics for us, the first thing is that we have to recognize that there's an immense pressure and reward system for being a rescuer. And a corollary of that positionality of the rescuer is then always developing this logic or this discourse of the alibi. The alibi is being a reason, we have a good reason why we were just somewhere else. And the only time we're not supposed to be somewhere else is when we're rescuing the others. And there's a lot of double binds involved in this. This is something I'm working on trying to figure out now as I try to figure out a way to extricate ourselves from this human rights discourse that's become dominant today and described by Robert Meister. But I'll just leave it right there at that. I found Nauki's presentation really extremely cogent and also easy to absorb. And maybe in the time remaining, people will have questions.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you, Nauki. Fortunately, we had our feminist part and engaged with comments, and this part is rather specific. I see Rada, please. Yes, go on, Rada. Just unmute yourself and go on with your.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I have maybe one or two thoughts. I'm not sure I have questions or very precise comments, but I would like to bring together the three presentations that we heard this afternoon, because all three were important, and with this ending with Nauki's remarkable presentation and then Jon's remarkable comments, I would like to give it a thought. And one of the things is that Jon mentioned some similarity with what Nauki has been talking about, some similarity with transitional justice. And this is what I see also as the preoccupation of our two previous presenters today, Veronica and Marinella. The two first presentations were feminist, but many of you probably know that Nauki has been engaged with feminist thinking a lot, and so he can count among the feminists. About the schema of configuration of West and the rest, about which you have been telling us, Nauki, and the configuration all the way into the constitution of the nation, or a representation of ourselves as a poetic technology, in the way in which we are co-formed by the other. Now, this is something which seems very essential to me, and which we find also in, I believe, in the thought and the work of Veronica, and also in what Marinella was telling us, not only in the sense of a generation gap. There is a generation gap in feminism as in other issues, of course, and we can solve it in different ways, but it comes back regularly. But nevertheless, it is a knowledge gap of about epistemic injustice, not only epistemic, but epistemic injustice. And this is very important, this epistemological element that Marinella was complaining about, because she said we are trying to reach at the margins, but we are not reaching them. No wonder, because it is impossible to reach the margins. They escape all the time. And this is what happens in activism all the time. I was interested in these talks about among other things, about theory. Both Veronica and Marinella insisted on theory. Veronica said that there is a desire for theory, and, which is very important, that the feminist movement is not anti-intellectual, which is probably right. And although I have met anti-intellectual feminists too, they exist. But nevertheless, when I was a young philosopher, I remember that I used to think that theory and philosophy itself is extremely important for women. Why? Because it excludes them. So they are the first and foremost to be interested in it. And Marinella confirms it in her own way, because she tries to construct them together. So this epistemic injustice, this is what it is all about. We are trying to mend it, but not only on this issue, on other issues too. I was wondering also why Naoki started from the very simple scheme of source language and target language, which is not only a binary scheme, but it is also an insufficient scheme for dealing with what he deals with. But I understood that this is also part of, because I have been reading him now for some years, among other things, thanks to John, who introduced me to Naoki. What did I mean to say now? This scheme of from one language to another seems too short for me, to me, but I understand that it is Naoki's technology of complicating the thing and of course exceeding it, and showing us this configuration as something that goes and in this beyond we can meet, right? We can meet both Veronica's, Marinella's, Naoki's work can coincide in building something with others, because it is obvious that everyone, both in thinking but also in activism, everyone needs allies. We cannot work alone, or when we work alone, it is a failure. I don't know whether you have any thoughts about it, but I was worried by what Naoki said about the translator who cannot say I. I won't comment any further, but it is a thought-provoking problem. Thank you, Naoki. And thank you, Veronica and Marinella and Manuel and John and everyone.
Thank you, Rada. As always, it's rich and thought-provoking. Boris, please.
Yes, I'm switching also now the camera on. Hello to everybody, Naoki, John, Rada. I have a question to Naoki, but also John, you can join in answering this question. I'm thinking in terms of historical development and the fact, probably I'm just like asking whether you would agree with me when I would claim now that the international world as we knew it, to use Carl Schmitt's Jus Publicum Europaeum, is crumbling, it is falling apart. And my question would be, what is then this? What is now beyond this international world? You know, where the Jacobson's concepts don't apply. This is something different. Is this the rest? is this how to define it in terms of temporality? You know, we know this other might be in some different temporality, it not part of the history. But this is one moment that we are now facing the historical contingency, which implies arbitrariness of these differences. You know, when de Saussure says that borders between languages, as well as the borders between a language and its dialects, are arbitrary. And in the moment of historical contingency, this arbitrariness is working now while we are speaking. So I mentioned Carl Schmitt. If we are now facing this, the arrival of the new nomos through the dissolution and the disorder, can we have really the border between the international world and its outside? Is it clear? This is one thing. And another thing, I would, Veronica, I have a question also very short for you. Translation truly contributes to mixing up struggles, etc. But have you ever think about the possibility that certain separation, and translation works also very hard to separate people, not only to bring them together, that might also have emancipatory effects? I was thinking, you know, about the use of the notion like left liberal, left grün, central left, that we have been using it for so many years. And what comes to my mind is it would be nice, you know, now probably to start to separate them a little bit in the time of crisis and war. And Marinella, very short, sorry, I have 3 questions. Marinella, a generation is definitely a concept of historical periodization, but we don't use the language of the historical experience. May you try? I'm truly interested in translating the notion of generation in the language of historical experience, because what obviously separates generations is a different historical experience. Can you a little bit, if something comes to your mind? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Boris. So, Vero, who is going to either comment or respond to Boris?
My response is really quick, so I'll go first, and that gives the other people a chance to really come up with their powerful. We're witnessing the end of hegemony of global whiteness, but this is not the end of whiteness as the referential basis for the color line, right? And the border between the international world and its outside, that's precisely what the capital relation has to control. So that's not going to end. That's just going to be exacerbated, multiplied, until we end capital. Okay.
May I would like to be also quite quick. So yeah, absolutely. The political context is what can give us like the levels of different generational points of views, but also the hegemonical perspective of the society which is in place at a certain times, and also different moments of reaction or pro-reaction, as we know from Yugoslavia. Women were demanding certain rights, which we now have, and we are trying to, well, in a better situation, we would be trying to upgrade them, but at this point, we are trying to hold our rights at a certain point. So, yeah, I think that this moment of being proactive or being reactive is also quite important. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Naoki. Thank you, Sean, also for the comments and your lecture. And I was thinking about the Boris question about differences and separation. And I think that, of course, we cannot think an idea of unity in a naive way, no? But we need to think how to produce dynamics of unity in terms of conflicts. And I think that conflicts is a more interesting horizon to think how we organize different lines of forces in a precise moment. And I think this is the dynamic of alliances also, that is not the same of the alliance of identities. I think the alliance between conflicts is very much practical and very much interesting in terms of also thinking about victories that we need to have. So I think that, of course, a lot of tags or labels are completely unuseful nowadays, like liberal left and so on. But I think that it's interesting, for example, in the feminist movement, we are also discussing the idea of international, like plurinational, like also multilingual spaces of different forms of communication, coordination, but also in terms of the feminist movement as a confrontation against the national and homogeneous subject of politics. And I think that this is very interesting in terms of also the confrontation with the idea of the popular as an homogeneous name. And also in terms of, well, the indigenous movement inside and in coalition with the feminist movement, that in Latin America is a very powerful schema also of political organization. So I think that all these issues and problematics are fundamental also to rename the idea of international feminism or international movement beyond that idea. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. This was a very intense session, and it raised a lot of issues that should be treated. And well, on behalf of Sasha and the Institute, and here on behalf of my colleagues in the ECA, and I'm sure Marinella will join, we will think of organizing and follow up or anything of the sort. Thanks a lot.